Thank you for watching my June wrap-up. Because I can't keep my head on straight, I've moved my videos to my personal YouTube channel from my kind of like business YouTube channel. It was too confusing to have too many channels, and I just do these book reviews for fun, so that's the way it's going to go now. Not like anyone watches these, but whatever. If you somehow are watching and are watching my previous episodes, that's why I stopped doing my little spiel at the start as of this review. If I have time, I think I'll try to do a favorite old school sci-fi video at some point next month, but I don't know if that'll happen. I only read 4 books in June, and one was huge though, so that's my excuse, and I was busy. As usual, you know, you can check my website, nostromopublications.com, for my written and, my written reviews and my analysis of old school sci-fi if you're into that. So, the first book that I read was The Eight-Pointed Cross by Marthese Fenech. It's a historical fiction, and I read it on my Kindle Fire. So I was recently introduced to the author. My mentor in my creative writing program put us in touch, and she is a lovely person. But I didn't read her novel out of some sort of like obligation. It honestly sounded like super interesting, and it was. The novel is absolutely wonderful. It has this perfect blend of historical detail, emotional depth, and action intrigue. And, while I tend to enjoy historical fiction, I generally stick to time periods that I focus on in university, so kind of anything kind of post-1800 and then ending after World War II, mainly British. That's just what I read in school because I focused on Victorian domestic fiction, and I love, the interwar war period. But upon reading kind of The Eight-Pointed Cross, I realized that this is likely a bad idea because I'm missing out on some great novels, specifically this one. So the novel is set in the mid-1500s on the island of Malta during a military aggression between the Ottoman Empire and the Knights of St. John, 2 factions I had limited to no knowledge of before this novel, I will admit. I kept having to remind myself that it's not the Crusades. I don't know why I kept thinking that. The story features some battle scenes, but mainly follows the life of these 2 siblings, and Katrina, who are these well-off peasants who live on Malta. And there's also some other chapters devoted to Demir, a young boy living in Istanbul under this powerful and tyrannical father. And as much as the battle scenes are exciting and uncensored from violence, which I like, the regular life of the 2 siblings is the most fascinating part of the novel. It kind of follows them from childhood to young adulthood, and we're shown in detail how regular people lived in the time period, which I find more fascinating anyway. So we're exposed to kind of how they're constrained by the order of knights socially, so in terms of gender roles and class mainly, and how they're physically threatened by raiding pirates and the Turkish invaders. Yet the Turks are not vilified. Both cultures are shown to be suffering from militant ideology and corruption, as well as having good and bad points. So it's not like a us versus them mentality, which is good because that's not really how the world is, or how we wish the world was. So what I particularly enjoyed, though, about this novel is how the female characters were given as much attention and as depth as the male ones. Because usually in these kind of time periods where men really did control everything, women are often put to the side. But this novel shows how different women kind of defied or adhered to the extreme patriarchy that they're forced to live and exist in. And it was realistic and relatable. And the male characters were very well developed as well, and they're likable. Even this one tormented character named Franco, who is my favorite character, I'd say. Mainly because you kind of knew what was going to go on with him, but you were like, don't do it, man. And there's just enough exposition, kind of the culture, the landscape, and historical data to kind of paint a vivid picture, but not enough to get boring. It's not one of those historical novels that feels like a textbook and then with a little bit of story. It's mainly story, but with these nice little kind of expository paragraphs that really kind of bring you into the moment. Despite the length of the book, it's like 800 pages, I could not put it down. I read it so quickly. And the novel makes me want to go visit Malta, a place that I'd never really thought of before. So I'll give it that if anything else, but honestly, it was a really good read. I give it 5 out of 5 stars, and I recommend it to anyone who loves historical fiction or just loves a good story and isn't afraid of a ton of pages. Seriously though, you fly through it. Like it's so much fun. So the second book that I read was A Game of Battleships, Space Captain Smith #4 by Toby Frost. So this is a science fiction comedy. It's a series. I ordered it off Amazon from some British used bookstore because that's where I get all of my Space Captain Smith, apparently. The only thing that I hate about these novels is that I read them so fast. It's not because they're too short or simplistic, it's that I can't put them down. Like, I am like addicted to them as soon as I pick them up. So this is iteration number 4 of the series. It follows Space Captain Smith and his crew on a mission to determine the origins of a dimension-jumping ship and assist in building diplomatic relations with alien races to help them in their war against these other people these other aliens and other people. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the plot in any depth because it would require expanding on books 1 to 3, but it's a very fun, silly sci-fi farce with lots of references to, you know, sci-fi and fantasy and even just like pop culture and things like that. A lot of them, some of them, not a lot of them, I don't know. I don't know how many are going over my head. I'm sure there are a bunch, but, you know, I pick up on most of the references, I think. I'm tempted to say that this one is my favorite. I've probably said this after every single one, maybe not the second one, but this one has all the aspects that I love about the series, as well as some development on the part of the characters. I really love this series because it seems like every book gives some character a bit of, you know, new backstory or new development, and I love that because you learn more about them and they grow as the series progresses. It's not just like the first couple books they're getting used to it and then they're the same characters all the time. They definitely change over the course of the series. And while the plot of this novel took a little longer to get going, I actually liked that slower pace. It let the crew interact in downtime rather than jumping from action to action scene, which is what a lot of the books have been in the past. And the space battle at the end made up for any kind of slowness at the start. This isn't going to be a huge review because this is part 4 of a series that's very consistent. So a lot of what I'd say is kind of repeating previous comments. But as I said, where the previous book has a major focus on Surak, who is my space boyfriend, this one gives Polly, one of the other characters, some screen time, which was a surprising turn of events, actually, because I expected that Smith would be afforded the opportunity that she was given, and I really appreciated that. The battle took on a slightly different style than the rest of Space Captain Smith. It reminded me more of Froth's serious fantasy Up to the Throne that I reviewed a few months ago, because it has a lot of detail and tension. It wasn't jarring, though, like, it didn't seem completely different, and it didn't take away from the comedic aspects of the rest of the story, but it was nice to get kind of a real action scene in these novels, because there are action scenes, but they're usually kind of like campy fun, where this one was actually felt like a space battle, like it could come out of a different book, which was actually nice, as I said. I love there was a new character, Captain Fitzroy, that I thought was hilarious, and I love that the bad guy from the last kind of 3 books was not kind of in this one. He's in it a little bit, but not a ton. It was getting a little bit tired of that 4'6" alien guy. So it was nice that he was kind of on the periphery. I actually gave it 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved it. I couldn't put it down. So good track record for these books this month. And if you haven't read any of these books at all, I recommend starting with Space Captain Smith. It's a completely fun ride, and I absolutely can't wait to read the next one. I'm going to hold out as long as possible, though. I might read the next one on vacation, because there's only 6, and there's 2 left. That makes me sad. The third book that I read was Flinx in Flux, which is Pip and Flinx number 6 by Alan Dean Foster. So it's like a classic science fiction. I got it at a used bookstore. I don't remember which one. Unfortunately, it was a rather humdrum adventure for Flinx and Pip, at least for me. So this is part of a series following this boy. In this book, he's now a man named Flinx and his tiny little hawk-like dragon named Pip. So Flinx is like mildly telepathic. And it's set in a future where Earth has allied with these bug-like aliens called the Thranks, as well as other races. So it's set like very far in the future. You know, we all travel to different planets, etc., etc. There's some wars, mainly peace, blah, 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 blah. It's actually a very well-developed world. I'm going to talk about his Founding of the Commonwealth series, which is like a prequel to all of these Flinx and Flux, plus some other books, probably in my favorite sci-fis video that I'm talking about earlier, because it's such a great world building and I absolutely love it. I love Alan Dean Foster. But anyway, this novel, Flinx, he's now 19. He's visiting this planet to drop off his little mini dragon's babies. And upon returning from the forest, he stumbles upon this unconscious and beaten up woman near the river. So he rescues her from the jungle and he takes her to her planet called Long Tunnel, where she's a bioengineer. And while he's there, he's going to wrestle with his feelings for her, as well as the eco-terrorists that show up, who had kidnapped her in the first place. It's kind of the basic plot. It's packed with the typical in-depth world building that I love about Alan Dean Foster, and you know, it has some cool aliens, but the plot and the characters leave much to be desired in this one. As I said before, my favorite parts about any Alan Dean Foster novel are his aliens. They're always well developed, such detail, they feel like they're real, and his planets are always just so neat and so interesting. He's been kind of an inspiration of mine, actually, when it comes to creating alien races. The trilogy that I'm working on now takes a lot kind of from him, like where I've really drilled down into the culture of the aliens that are in my story, and, you know, he's definitely an inspiration. But his humans in this one are a little dry. Flinx was much more interesting when he was a young teenager, kind of learning his place in the universe. Now that he's 19, he is fine, but he carries on as if he was like a 50-year-old man. He doesn't feel like he changes much for the novel either. Like, love, obviously there's a love story given the cover with, you know, the lady. Oh my god. Should have softened or hardened him or changed him or had some effect on him at some point. But because they had absolutely no chemistry whatsoever, I felt like Clarity, that's her name, was like this passing interest of his. It could also be because she had no personality or you know, contributed to the plot at all, aside from needing rescue and protection, so maybe that was part of the problem. I go on about that at length in my old school sci-fi analysis blog, so feel free to peruse that. Definitely, though, she is not a progressive female character. She's not terrible, but she definitely doesn't give Flinx a lot to work with in terms of falling in love with her. Yet, the novel, you know, it's easy and fun to read. Colleen Foster excels, as I've said a million times before, describing aliens and alien worlds. But I think the main problem with the book here was the fact that it takes place in a cave for the most part on a Terran colony, so there's no aliens. There's some like cave creatures, but we don't learn a lot about them, so I'm not getting kind of the anthropological kind of voyeurism that I really want. And Flinx, when he's mulling over his family history the whole time, is kind of a buzzkill. Like, he's kind of not a fun character. And, you know, he's full of doubt, but he's so precocious. He gets so irritating very quickly. And yeah, I'm just not fond of him right now. Hopefully the next book of his, he's a little bit more mature, but not as mature as he is now. I wish he would just, you know, act like a 20-year-old. Get drunk, Flinx. Like, jeez. It's alright. You know, I give it a 3 out of 5 stars. I recommend it only to those who have read the previous 5 because you kind of need to know who Flinx and Pip are, and this is... yeah, I don't know. Apparently Clarity comes back because I saw some synopsis of another book later in the series, so we'll see what happens with that. But, yeah. Not bad, but whatever. The last book that I read was called Red Noise by John P. Murphy. I received this one as an ARC from NetGalley in exchange for a fair review. It's a hard sci-fi action. So as I was reading it, something struck me as familiar about it. But I didn't pick up on it until like almost the end because I'm an idiot and I was sleep deprived. It's definitely paying homage to Japanese samurai films like Kurosawa and American Westerns. I am not a buff of the genre, but I definitely am a fan of the aesthetic and the style of Westerns and Kurosawa. I mean, I love Throne of Blood and Seven Samurai, but... you know, I haven't seen all of his movies. I probably should. But I know kind of the tropes, and I know, and I'm like dumbass, did not pick up on it because I was so sleep deprived having my newborn and a toddler. So I actually want to go back and read it again because I missed probably so much. Like, I am flummoxed how I missed this. Anyway, even the cover looks like a minimalist Seven Samurais poster. So don't read books when you're sleep deprived, I guess. I don't know. I did manage to read Cameron Hurley's book, The Stars Are Legion, though, when I was, like, had a brand new baby, my first baby, and I managed to enjoy that, so maybe I thought I could power through this one, but anyway. Like samurai and Western films, this novel starts off with a mysterious stranger entering a corrupt town. In this case, the town is a near-abandoned and sparsely populated space station. It's super cool. There are these 3 leaders vying for control of the space station, including the cops, one of which is, like, the typical mustachioed sheriff. Super cool. None of them are ideal rulers, of course, and the miner, as she's called, decides to lend her particular brand of assistance to pick a ruler. And she uses, you know, she does this with a sword. Unfortunately, what I didn't get was why. So in Western movies, the character is a trope, but the novel, while I completely loved it, suffers a bit with regards to the miner's motivation. We don't really learn enough about her to understand why she would just leave, why she cares at all about these people. You know, it never felt to me like she was trapped, you know, by money or other reasons. And she always seemed to have, you know, an answer, an ability to escape whatever situation she found herself in. There were attempts to have her wrestle with staying, but it didn't feel deep enough to me to actually resonate properly. You know, I get that in the movies that character doesn't need a rationale because they are kind of a trope. But from the book, I expected a bit more depth from the main character. It's hard because I really liked how we didn't learn that much about her, actually. Just little tidbits here and there. But it did make her, you know, it does make it hard to understand why she does what she does. So the story felt a little bit flat near the end. It's the same with the other characters. You know, I loved the dialogue, the diversity, the ambiance of the station, and how no one was kind of sacred in terms of violence being bestowed upon them. But the 3 leaders, and then Mary and Raj, also needed way more background. I found I didn't care about them as people. They were fun to read about, but I didn't really care about, you know, who was the leader of the town. Don't get me wrong though, this book is an absolute blast. I love the amount of women in the novel, and the dark humor made me laugh aloud. Like, there's some part where a guy is talking, the miner walks past these guys, and one's talking about how he wants to get a chainsaw, and then way at the end of the novel, you know, during a battle scene, it's like, in the distance she heard a chainsaw rev, and I'm just like, that's amazing. There's also like a dynamic between the bartender and his regular, which is another Western trope, the saloon. That was so much fun. And then, you know, the action scenes were great. So even if you don't like or know Westerns or samurai films, or if you're sleep deprived like me, it is a fun, gritty, action-packed adventure that just happens to be set in space. I give it, you know, I want to give it 5 out of 5, but I just can't because of that whole, you know, that whole thing I talked about, the miner's character development. But like an easy 4.5 out of 5. And I recommend it to anybody who loves sci-fi and action. It's just a blast. So thank you for watching my wrap-up. If you've read any of these books, you know, feel free to comment.
Water pug surveys his domain, wet from his recent attack of the sharks of the lake. He's the king. He's the king.